Ja, hallo liebe Welt.
Hey.
Hi, wir freuen uns, euch zu dem Track Agile Leadership begrüßen zu können. Der liegt uns, glaube ich, ganz besonders am Herzen, weil wir als Unternehmen, das ganz viel mit agiler Transformation beschäftigt ist, merken, wie wichtig einfach Führung und der Führungsaspekt ist. Und ich glaube, zum einen in dem Team, ja, Selbstführung, Selbstmanagement ist ganz wichtig. Und auch Führung, was macht eigentlich die Führungskräfte, dass sie einen Rahmen bereitstellen, dass Agilität funktionieren kann. Also ich finde es ein total spannendes Thema.
Ja, ich freue mich auch sehr. Heute hier aus Wiesbaden, wir mussten nicht lange anreisen aus Darmstadt, sind bequem hergekommen, haben uns hier jetzt eingefunden, freuen uns ganz besonders auf den ersten Talk, jetzt gleich mit dem Wolfgang Hilpert. Wir konnten gerade schon ein bisschen miteinander sprechen. Es geht um Voraussetzungen für Agilität. Der Talk wird in Englisch stattfinden und vielleicht sagen wir noch ein bisschen was zu Wolfgang.
Genau, Wolfgang hatte seit vielen Jahren Leitungsfunktionen inne, er kennt DAX-Unternehmen, kennt Mittelstand, weiß, was es bedeutet, agil zu arbeiten. Und ich glaube, wie viele andere Menschen kennt er auch, dass es dafür einen Rahmen braucht und wie viel Frust man sich einhandeln kann, wenn der Rahmen nicht existiert.
Und wie groß der ist in Corona-Zeiten und Remote-Zeiten, darüber hatten wir es auch gerade und das fühlt ihr sicher auch da draußen.
Genau, und von daher sind wir ganz gespannt, was Wolfgang uns mitgeben kann, was es braucht, damit Agilität funktioniert.
Okay, ja.
So, dann danke Wolfgang, wir freuen uns auf deinen Vortrag.
Genau,
okay.
Schieß los.
Yeah, danke euch. Thanks. Okay, let's get started. So I'm excited to talk about the prerequisites for agility and what it takes to get the starting lineup right so that we're getting ready for a smooth ride and a pleasant and successful journey. A couple of words about myself. I'm, as was announced, Wolfgang Hilpert. I've been in pretty much 25 years in leadership positions, from a startup that I once co-founded, and then took me the journey to large companies in both sides of the Atlantic, as well as over the last 10, 12 years in mid-sized companies. And I have developed an increasingly intensive passion and interest in the agile and lean methods. I've come to really appreciate that as a key asset, as a key tool in my toolbox to help myself as well as the teams, the organizations I've had the pleasure to work with to establish a better and increasingly improved way of working. And some of these insights, some of these experiences I'd like to share here today. So when we look at this problem space of a transformation in general and agile transformations in particular, the larger they are, it seems to me, the more they are in danger to actually come to a screeching halt and not deliver what they are supposed to deliver and why they were started in the first place. And how does that happen? What's behind that? There are various studies, various surveys about this. Here's one that I'm referring to that really points out that the leadership support is at the front and center of trying to figure out what's behind if something doesn't work as expected. It's not just the support as such, it's really the understanding. It's really the fully aligning on what are agile methods in the first place. Why are we even entertaining the thought of going agile? What's behind that? What is who will be affected of the change? What does it have an impact, for example, on leadership behavior? What is this process going to look like altogether? What's behind the scenes, so to speak? Having more clarity about this before deciding to even get on the journey seems to be a real critical piece. And if we peel the onion a little bit and look behind the covers of what's often not at sync, it is really the expectation of what this transformation is all about. So I've come across this term transformation impasse, where the leadership often tends to think about, oh, I've heard Agile is a good thing. It's about getting faster, cheaper results of what I've been used to, but now just do it better. And pretty much everybody else may have very different expectations for why we're doing this. So how can we close that gap? How can we cut through this transformation impasse? Well, certainly not by just applying the same old thinking that kind of got us in this in the first place. You've heard about this definition of insanity by Albert Einstein, trying the same approach over and over again and expecting a different result. So if you're coming into this transformation effort with a plan-driven expectation, a waterfall leadership style with command and control and things that come with it, you're not very likely to have much of a success, a good experience with your Agile transformation. Thinking about this, isn't that really an irony? Trying to pursue responsiveness, an iterative approach with inspect and adapt, while at the same time expecting a fixed, long-term, detailed plan with predetermined milestones that you can track on a Gantt chart, whether these and these teams have had these trainings and have had nominations for product owners, et cetera, all very planned out for the next year or two or maybe three, and you just go via checkboxes whether everybody fulfilled these outputs. Isn't that an irony? Yes, it is. So that's clearly not the recommended path. And, we can talk about all these different obstacles that are in the way of an successful transformation. I don't want to go through all of those in detail, but obviously just this idea of a fixed start and a fixed end date for a traditional project rarely is going to end up being a transformational and certainly not an agile transformation. That's why I like actually the term agile journey, that I'm getting on and keep traveling on, more of a long-lasting effort, actually a change in a way of working, of thinking, of behaving. I think, for me at least, fits better. So let's get into this. I like to use an analogy of a pilot. I'm not a pilot, I have to admit. My son happens to be one. He got a license a few months ago. And he told me this, that before he actually gets to the starting lineup, he has to fulfill a bunch of things, checkboxes, checklists, before he can even pull up on this on the runway and get into a position that he gets the approval to get the go-ahead to gain speed, pick up speed, and then really through the acceleration, lift off, gain altitude, and be on to a successful journey. Couldn't we try a similar thing, or the analogy, with our agile journey? First off, we really need to talk about how we align on the goals, on what's involved in this, and we'll obviously get more deeply into this. Then, if we have really a base level of understanding aligned, we can talk about guidance for the leadership to set expectation of what's coming, invite a broad-based engagement, and then really affirm a deep commitment to the change and not be surprised as much as otherwise we might be. And then really be onwards to a successful and pleasant journey. So let's talk about the first step here, the alignment, really this getting the starting lineup right. I can think of it, for those obviously among us that appreciate this notion of an agile practice, of a definition of ready for user story. It's kind of like your readiness state for even getting started with your agile journey. That's what we're essentially talking about. And why is the alignment so important? Well, if we really invest the right level of energy, the right level of capacity into figuring out how we align ourselves around the journey we're about to take on, we can actually we can set up ourselves so that we can easily provide the autonomy to the various parties, the various parts of the organization, the teams involved, and still be confident we're all moving in the same direction. So when we look at this change, there's essentially 4 different dimensions or 4 different views of this change. It starts with the outcomes that we're intending. So why are we in the first place talking about we want to go on an agile journey? The next is the what. What's the theory behind the approach, the change approach? Who's involved, and particularly what behaviors in our day-to-day working, in our day-to-day experience would need to change to also have an effect, a lasting effect, that is, on the culture. And last, the how. So what are the actions that we need to do differently than we've done before so that we actually can expect different results? Let's talk about those. On the why, there might be various different reasons why a company would consider wanting to go agile. Hopefully it's not just, oh, I've heard from my golf course partner that agile is a cool thing and I better do it as well. That might be a reason. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's because I want to improve the adaptiveness, the responsiveness of our organization. I want to see the customer focus improve, the engagement of the employees, that they really identify with their work and bring the very best into their work. Maybe it's the product quality that needs improvement. Risks need to be mitigated better. The innovation power needs to be improved, whatever it is. Depends on what your business situation is. This is an example of what I've worked with in a particular organization where they recognized, yes, the financial health is obviously key to our long-term sustainability. However, we recognize without a strong employee engagement and a strong delivery of customer value, this ain't going to happen. Certainly not on the long run. And oh, by the way, we need to challenge ourselves to increasingly be more effective in this value creation. And then, yes, there are other things around this that will support these goals, but these are the 4 core elements that we really want to see improve. Now we have a strong, clear set of sense of purpose of why we are engaging in this agile journey. Let's talk about the what. Starts with what is actually involved in terms of roughly the duration, the scale, the scope of these changes. What is the approach we're taking to these changes? Is it a one-time big change? Is it a long-term? Is it iterative? What about the leadership behavior? What about the culture, structures, operating model? Well, when I look at the various stages that typically, and doesn't have to be exactly this way, but by and large, I've seen more or less these different stages of agility that companies go through. It's very important to, one, recognize where are we ourselves at any given stage. And let's be honest, in many places, I found companies really being stuck here. They go through the motions of agilities. They might have Kanban boards and stand-ups and maybe have nominated some Scrum Masters or even product owners. However, in their day-to-day work, not all that much has changed. Certainly not in how goals are defined, etc. If you really want to go through these various stages, it takes a while. And in the most cases, it will actually take multiple years before you get through this. So set the expectation. Typically, I would suggest it's 2, 3, maybe 5 years until you will start seeing really the benefits of a persistent agility where ultimately it is natural. It's more natural for the business to stay on that level rather than kind of go back and digress. Okay. One of the things that obviously is all about, what Agile is all about, is about feedback cycles, right? So you want to do a continuous inspect and adapt. And obviously from whatever you learn, you want to improve. Now, if this is true for the products or services you're producing, why wouldn't the same hold true for your change, for your Agile journey? The same should obviously be true for the transformation. Oh, and by the way, be ready that things will go wrong. Failure is an option. It's not that I'm glorifying failure or I'm actually asking you to fail. I'm just asking or reminding us we should expect failure will happen. It's actually, if we change our attitude from, failure is a bad thing, it shouldn't happen. If it happens, let's try to hide it so nobody can get annoyed or could get blamed or anything of that. That's not the best way to utilize if a failure happens. If a failure happens, change your mind towards, okay, I need to obviously correct this. I need to make something better. Particularly if a customer was affected by, let's say, a bug that escaped our testing, I need at least to provide a workaround rapidly. But then comes the real opportunity to learn from this failure, to understand how did it even happen. So read the signal as an opportunity to learn, to improve, and then actually do it and get better. That's the way to actually learn. Oh, and by the way, this is not just true on the product. It is even true on the whole organization, on the improvement potential in general. So really the way you think about obstacles, I learned that in my early days in getting in touch with Lean and Agile and whatnot. So the coaches there told us about this analogy between manufacturing and lean manufacturing and, let's say, obstacles that happen to be in the water, be it a lake, be it a river. These obstacles are on the ground, on the floor of this water. And if the water level is high, you wouldn't even see them. Now, if you lower the water level, all of a sudden, all these things come to the surface and you start seeing them. This might be very unpleasant. However, change your mind towards you can now remove those and become better. So this is true with reducing the inventory in a lean production. So now you start seeing where your potential for improvement is. And the very same is true in an analogy, again, to then software development, shortening the iterations, the feedback cycles. So that's why a Scrum sprint every 2 weeks, in my book, is typically a best practice, because this gives you a good opportunity to inspect and adapt very regularly, very often, and keep improving. And oh, by the way, the same that we're trying to do for the product, we should do as well for our change, for our transformation. For that, a prerequisite, talking about prerequisites, very important is that we have what's called psychological safety, so that everybody involved feels totally safe to actually make an observation, to tell us, here's something that needs improvement. Here's something I'm worried about. If you don't have that, you won't have transparency. If you don't have transparency, you won't be able to get into this fast feedback cycle, etc. There's a whole theory behind this. There's a professor, Amy Edmondson, that is really describing what a fearless organization uses. Very interesting topic. If you haven't had a chance, I encourage you to check this out. And this is not just theory. This is very practical. So Google spent quite some effort in understanding what sets those teams that are really effective and successful on the market apart from those that maybe are not. And one trait really was very obvious with those when they checked into that from various angles: trust. You can equate that to psychological safety. So we have no fear. We're fearless to actually talk about what needs improvement. So this is a very serious business requirement. And that brings us to the leadership behavior and culture change. So if a failure happens, and as a leader, as a manager, I'll first look for whom to blame. I can be sure as hell that nobody will keep making those observations. I will only learn about a failure when it's too late, when maybe the customer tells me about it. So this is very important to change. So the leadership behavior is obviously paramount in describing and evolving a culture change. How does that really relate together? Well, Simon Sinek gave us insights about this. His definition is roughly culture equals values times behavior. So it is great if we put up posters on our walls or doors or what have you to say we really appreciate integrity as a corporate value. That's really important to us. That's great. It's even better if we put this together with specific behavior. So, for example, doing the right thing, particularly when it's hard and nobody's looking. That's what we're really after. And also be noted, if we don't really live those values, but actually our actions, if we don't walk the talk, if our actions contradict these values, we actually end up with a negative culture, also known as a toxic culture. And this might sound theoretically. Unfortunately, I've seen that in many organizations. So this is a core piece to enabling a successful transformation. Getting this on one level higher, it's really a new way of thinking that we really need to establish across the company, and particularly within leadership. So really having a system thinking, not a tayloristic of just my department does everything right, we're safe. My bonus is good. That's not what we're after. We really need to think about the entire system. We need to be customer value and market value oriented. We need to make learning really our nature, second nature, or our attitude. We learn from failures, referring back to the obstacles. The obstacle is the way. And get ready for continuous improvement. Keep challenging ourselves. What can we do better? It's not about can we afford to do something better? Can we afford to learn? What do we have to change? What must we change? What must we improve? That's the attitude. And that will give us the opportunity to establish a new way of working. So leaders are less about controlling people, but much more controlling the direction in which we're moving, and then inspiring and providing the autonomy and giving an environment in which the working people can really do their very best. Talking about the structures and operating model, this is a very core part of the change as well. So while leaders have been, informed by the industrial age and by the tayloristic thinking of optimizing for certain functions, really been looking for how can I optimize my particular domain. Let's say in a tech team, the operations, the IT operations, or the data access, or the data storage, or in a larger context, how can I optimize the finance department or the HR department? That has served purposes and was useful to some extent in non-industrial, beyond industrial, in the digital age, where knowledge and really understanding connections between the various parts is paramount, is going to be critical, success critical. It is about the value stream that we need to optimize, not the separate functions. And therefore, working increasingly in self-organizing and cross-functional teams that really bring the perspective from the different domains together in order to continuously optimize the value creation for the customer is what's needed for a resilient, for an agile organization. And I was touching on this, cross-functional teams that really bring the different perspectives together directly on the working level, as opposed to having to call for a different department. I need that help. I need this help. And there are gatekeepers in front of this. In a cross-functional team, that's not needed. We have people that can solve the problem from various angles directly if they are empowered, if we're bringing the decision-making power close to where actually the insight about the facts is. That requires that obviously the leadership responsibilities have to change. Talk about that in the behaviors. When we have the aspiration to evolve from a firm that put itself pretty much in the center and happened to have customers floating around, and every now and then they would guess distributions of our products, towards a company that puts the customer value in the center of our concern, of our focus, and then the firm, us, making sure we really recognize, we deeply understand what the customer is missing and what could provide value to them, so that if we provide it, they will want more from us. Then we'll start thinking about what are the things that make that possible versus what doesn't. So the traditional bureaucracy is not what's going to make this happen or make this successful. Let me just go back here. Options. A focus merely on the optimizing for the shareholder is not what is going to help here. Bosses that are, really commanding in a command and control style and in a hierarchical way is not going to help here. What's going to help is what Stephen Denning captured as 3 fundamental laws of agility. One is really this value to the customers. We keep looking at, we keep improving our line of sight so that we best understand, maybe even better than the customers themselves, what is providing value to them, and are obsessed about getting better and better at delivering this. The best way to do that is by small, self-organizing teams that within these short feedback cycles can deliver and learn from what maybe didn't go so well, correct this. It's about the speed of learning. And then, yes, we recognize if there are bigger items to deliver, we need obviously to interact between the teams in a network of teams. But it's first very important, not about scaling the agility. It's about really getting agile first within these teams. So descale first the problem and then look for how you're connecting and bring this together. That's kind of like one perspective of this. You may say this is the theory. So what's needed for this? Well, let's be honest. How do we optimize? Who adjusts for whom? So in the traditional world, it was the shareholder that required adjustment by the management to really serve their needs, that requires adjustments by the employees to fit as kind of like, little pieces in a process, predetermined, predefined, and really operate as a machine, right? There's a very mechanistic worldview towards a new worldview where we put the customer view, the customer needs in the focus, and we put the teams as close as reasonably possible to understanding what the customers need and adjust what the customer requires in short feedback cycles, optimizing the value stream. And then the leadership is really focused on adjusting the system so that the teams can do the very best work they possibly could. So removing impediments. How are we going to do this? What is the constraints, the experimentation levels, the ecosystem, etc.? Well, first, it starts with departing from this traditional mechanistic view of an organization towards a more organic or social systemic thinking about the various relationships within an organization. And as I mentioned already before, failure or mistakes are not necessarily a thing to be condemned or to be avoided. Recognize they will happen. So then establish a system so that you recognize these as quickly, as early as possible and learn from them. Who never admits to a mistake will never learn anything. And that has profound consequences for behavior, leadership behavior, for anybody. Oh, by the way, these insights aren't new. Professor Russell Eckhoff had already observed these in the 90s. So it's about time to actually learn from those. And peeling the onion here one more, it's going from this traditional system thinking that is very linear, deterministic, and static, where we have a cause and an effect, or maybe the more complex version, a fishbone diagram, right? Very specific causes that all have this effect. That's a mechanistic traditional thinking that has its purpose in certain circumstances. However, in a digital age where things are way more complex, we need to recognize there are circular interdependencies. They're non-deterministic, particularly in a social system like an organization. And they're dynamic, they change. So the cause and effect is not going to be the only way, right, to support us as we scale. What's helping us is trust. So the question is, are the teams working for each other? Or are they like different departments? Are they working against each other? So if, to provoke an example here, if sales says, okay, we've retired our quota, we've sold everything we could to these fancy customers, if now only engineering can deliver, and if engineering fails to deliver what we promised, we'll blame them. And the engineering goes, oh geez, if these salespeople would only ever promise things that are even possible to build, we would have a much better life. That's the working against each other. The model where people are working together is if sales would actually work together with the engineering before they make promises to the customer. Maybe they make different promises to the customer together that they can actually hold. So that's all about the changes needed. And we talked about culture change, culture shift. And the culture is not a knob that you just turn. Like profit margin is not a knob you just turn. There are various ingredients that need to move, various levers that you can play with that ultimately, if done well, will result in a positive shift. And that's the same with the culture. So having a different understanding of these systems, having obviously different processes, practices, structures, skills, and certainly different behaviors is paramount to get to a culture shift. I talked about the need for continuously improving. That's paramount, and you need to make room for this. So no need to complain, oh, we're not predictable in our deliverables. We keep failing at the last minute our deliverables. Well, unless you actually make time to understand what's wrong and give, for example, the teams delivering the opportunity to improve the system so that they're in a better position to actually deliver predictably, you're not likely to be successful. So that's why this thinking of having a system working within the system of delivery, where you have a product backlog that you turn, you pull items for the next sprint that you will then deliver, while also considering working on the system. Maybe you have observed certain impediments, certain shortcomings, certain problem areas, establish them in an impediment backlog, and then prioritize that, groom that regularly, and identify those things that need the work most in your transformation backlog. And then you balance between the work on the transformation backlog versus the product backlog for any step in the process. These are then all the things coming together. It's kind of like your DOR for the Agile transformation. I want to speed up a little bit because we're getting out of time. So if you have all these things under control, then we can talk about a specific guidance for the leadership. So one of the things that's very, very important to take away is it's not going to be sufficient if leaders just kind of tolerate the move to Agile. So somebody, some teams started this and I'm not going to stop them. Let them experiment. That's okay. Or I actually tell other teams, no, see, this team did this. That's pretty cool. You do that too, but don't affect me. That's not going to be effective. I call that the Agile twilight zone. What you want is leaders that are going first, that immerse themselves, that are curious, that are ambitious to actually make the move, make the change also in their behaviors and how they fit in and help the teams themselves. What does that need? Well, you need to upskill most usually, the leaders with ideally experimental learning of Agile. So rather than send them to school, give them opportunity to experience a different way of working, maybe amongst themselves as leaders, and be clear that they can together develop what Agile leadership is all about and what the responsibilities are. And one tip I would give is before you stuff new information, try to stuff new information into their brain, recommend that it's a good practice before you can take on new things, like in your cup of tea, maybe it's a good idea to first empty your cup before you can take on new. So certain things, before you want to learn new, you may want to actually first let go, right? So you need to unlearn certain behavior that maybe made you successful in the past. Hero cult. So I had always these heroes on my team that when push comes to shove, I could depend on. They would bail me out. Well, maybe that was hiding certain problems that were created. Maybe it's not such a good idea. I was used to, if I really had a very detailed, perfect plan, then I have something to hold on to. Like, building a brand new airport at a capital in Germany. Perfect plan. Maybe it didn't work so well. So maybe there are other practices we could do. And here's a good video if you want to think about this more. This letting go, unlearning certain behavior is hard. It's hard work, but it's worth it. So that now you can make room and actually start thinking about new behaviors. And here's, out of all, right, a military. General Stanley McChrystal gave us good insights into what's needed for agile leadership. Adaptation over terrorism, or networks over hierarchies, right? Empowerment over directions, etc. Here's some more tips. Experimentation, servant leadership. What does servant leadership mean? Well, if I have a problem within my team or within my environment, I can go and shout at developers, go code it faster. I can shout at my grass if it isn't green enough or growing as quickly as my neighbor's grass. Or I can change the environment. I can give the grass more moisture, more light, more fertilizer.
Wolfgang?
Maybe that's a better chance. Yes.
Yeah, you're moderators, and you need to come to an end. So we have one more question. And
yes, good. So here are different ways of the leadership styles, and they're depending on the situation. They're different. Now, if we have this, we need a broad-based engagement. That's pretty obvious. I'll skip over this. And then we can have an ongoing commitment, iteration, and here's an approach. We can skip through this. One thing I want to remind us is these are patterns we want to adopt. Back to my analogy with the pilot, bear in mind, gravity never sleeps. Any pilot will tell you that. So even if you have done all of these things well, keep at it. Stay on alert, because if you lose it, a pilot would lose altitude if they don't worry about it. We would lose agility. So keep at it. Okay? And bear in mind, if all of these things are going well, Agile is a journey. It's not the goal by itself. The question is not to ask, are we agile yet? The question is, are we delivering the business value to our customers? And agile is a means to an end. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Wolfgang. And especially deliver value to customers, because we very often as agile teams look at ourselves. We have one more question, and I would like to give you that question. And that is, if you have an organization which really has different teams, where teams, departments have a very different level of agility from, I have no clue what agility is, and competent agile teams, what would you do with such a company, with such an organization?
I would encourage them to start building a community of interested people where they actually talk about and exchange the ideas. So what worked here versus what worked there? What are the challenges there? So that they start to coach each other and hopefully, in the best case, start distilling what are better practices, maybe even best practices, but practices that worked in some area of the organization and potentially is helpful in other areas, and thus start becoming better and better together.
Like a community of practice, or?
That's it, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I have one last question, which is rather about the organization of this. Are these presentations somewhere shared?
So I will happily share it when I'm told where to put it.
Okay, we will later on. So stay tuned. In the next session, we will tell you where to get the presentations of this track.
Yeah, because your presentation was really full of so many knowledge, and I'm very interested in reading some of the books you've mentioned.
Okay.
Und das nächste, jetzt gehen wir wieder ins Deutsche über, also
wir
für alle englischsprachigen.
Deutsch switchen. Der nächste Vortrag ist wieder auf Deutsch. Wir freuen uns, wenn ihr am Ball bleibt, wenn ihr bei uns im Track bleibt. Danke auch dir für den englischen Vortrag, Wolfgang.
Gerne.